What's up, you guys? Welcome back. If you are new here, my name is Jess and I like to talk about movies that make you want to sleep with the lights on. I am so excited for today's video because today we will be talking about my favorite horror movies from the 80s. And I'm gonna kind of go at this like I did my 2000s favorite list. So I'm gonna have one favorite for 81, one for 82, all the way up to 89. Then of course we hit the 90s. The 80s is one of my favorite eras. Decades? Like I was saying, the 80s is one of my favorite decades in horror. It has some of my favorite movies of all time, and it actually has my favorite horror movie of all time, which of course we'll get there. We'll get there when we get there. Don't hold your horses. I love the 80s. Let's get into it. Starting right at 1980, my favorite horror movie from this year is The Shining. Directed by Stanley Kubrick, The Shining is based on Stephen King's 1977 novel of the same name, which follows Jack Torrance, an aspiring writer and recovering alcoholic who agrees to be the off-season caretaker of the historic Overlook Hotel. I understand there are a lot of things that could be said and that have been said about The Shining over the past few years. However, we cannot deny that it is simply one of the greatest horror movies of all time. I'm a fan of Stephen King as an author, and I completely understand why he does not like this adaptation of his book, but I believe that what Stanley Kubrick was able to achieve with this adaptation just transcends the written word. Other than the career-defining performances given by literally everyone in the cast, one of my favorite things about The Shining is that every time I watch it, I find something new. If you are a part of the fan base, if you have done a little bit more research into the movie, you know that there are tons of conspiracy theories about what people think this movie actually means. Is Kubrick trying to tell us that he faked the moon landing? No. But a lot of people believe that. If you haven't heard about these theories and are interested in learning a little bit more, I highly suggest watching the documentary Room 237. If you watch it as kind of an outsider, not really believing any of these theories, it's really interesting to see what Kubrick's direction with this film has made people think and believe. I could keep talking about this movie for hours and hours, so I'm forcing myself to move on. My pick for 1981's best horror movie is My Bloody Valentine. A Canadian slasher film directed by George Mialka, My Bloody Valentine follows a decades-old folktale surrounding a deranged murderer killing those who celebrate Valentine's Day. When the legend turns out to be true, a group of friends defy the killer's orders and start turning up dead. A lot of people tend to group this into the category of movies that rode the coattails of other holiday movies that had come out in the recent years, right? Like Friday the 13th, Halloween, Black Christmas. But I feel like My Bloody Valentine deserves its own recognition. And I understand the point that it is a holiday movie, and maybe it does have a storyline that's the love child of Halloween and Friday the 13th. But should we be mad about that? I feel like that's pretty awesome in the first place. The kills are creative and bloody. In fact, this movie had to be cut down about 5 minutes because the MPAA simply would not allow it to be played on screen because it was too bloody. The atmosphere is just so fun and chaotic. The fact that it takes place in mines is claustrophobic, and I love that setting for a horror movie. It's just an all-around fun watch that I think stands on its own, and if you're in the mood for typical 80s slasher cheese, try this one out. 1982 is the year that my favorite horror movie of all time came out, and it's John Carpenter's The Thing. The Thing follows members of an American scientific research outpost in Antarctica that find themselves battling a parasitic alien organism capable of perfectly imitating its victims. I'm not going to go deep into this one because I get started on a tangent and I just ramble. We don't have time for that, but in my eyes, this is virtually a perfect film. One thing that I can appreciate in any horror movie is an isolated setting, and you're not going to get a more isolated setting than this one. That setting just intensifies the theme of the fear of the unknown, not knowing who the person is standing right next to you, right? Because this alien can take on human forms. We don't know if our best friend and the person that we trust with our lives is an alien or if they're really our best friend. That's terrifying. Every performance is perfect, especially Kurt Russell, one of my favorite performances in a horror movie of all time. And of course, the reason why this movie is so respected and so loved is because of those practical effects, baby. I sincerely doubt that there will ever be another horror movie that I will love as much as The Thing. For 1983, I think it's pretty clear that John Carpenter is one of my favorite directors because I'm gonna choose Christine. Based on Stephen King's novel of the same name, Christine follows Arnie Cunningham, his friends, his family, and his teenage enemies after Arnie buys a classic red and white 1958 Plymouth Fury named Christine, a car that seems to have a mind of its own. Y'all, Stephen King was so popular in the 80s that this movie began production before the book was even published. The performances are so great, and I love Carpenter's take on this classic novel. You feel like Christine is actually a entity, you know, like you feel her rage, you feel her jealousy, and you find yourself kind of rooting for her a little bit. It's crazy what this movie can make you feel. And even though it's a movie about a possessed car, it still is creepy in a way that only Carpenter himself can pull off. 1984 gave birth to another of my favorite horror movies of all time, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Of course, directed by Wes Craven, Nancy Thompson must uncover the dark truth concealed by her parents after she and her friends become the target of the spirit of a serial killer, armed with a bladed glove in their dreams, in which if they die, it kills them in real life. Nightmare is just another classic movie that completely changed the game for horror movies since. Even though he has since yet passed away, Wes Craven remains one of the most iconic and respected directors in the horror community because of his ability to draw inspiration from the mundane, his everyday life, to translate that on screen into something that is both realistic and terrifying. I mean, the man named Freddy Krueger after his childhood bully, who was named Fred Krueger. Man's a genius. Nancy Thompson is in my top 2 favorite final girls of all time. Heather Langenkamp does such an outstanding job bringing her character to life, and her chemistry with Robert Englund's Krueger, so great. Moving right along to 1985, we have the first of 2 vampire movies on this list, Fright Night. Fright Night follows young Charlie Brewster, who discovers that his next-door neighbor, Jerry, is a vampire. When no one believes him, Charlie decides to get Peter Vincent, a TV show host who acted in films as a vampire hunter, to stop Jerry's killing spree. In my humble opinion, Fright Night is one of the best vampire movies ever made. It is always my go-to pick whenever I have a friend over who's not 100% into horror, but wants that with a little sprinkle of goofy, fun, and good practical effects. If you haven't seen this one or have been putting it off for whatever reason, I'm begging you, just pause this and go watch it. It's worth it. 1986 was a little tough for me because 2 great movies came out this year. And even though I love Aliens, I'd be lying if I didn't say I loved The Fly a little bit more. This movie's hard to sum up, but I'm gonna give it a shot. A brilliant but eccentric scientist begins to transform into a giant man-fly hybrid after one of his experiments goes horribly wrong. Of course, The Fly is directed by body horror master David Cronenberg, and while, yes, he as a director is known for
body horror,
all of his movies, and especially The Fly, just hit at levels deeper. Jeff Goldblum completely transforms into Dr. Seth Brundle and later the Brundle Fly, giving, in my opinion, his best performance of all time. His chemistry with Gina Davis, who he was actually dating at the time of filming, lends so much validity to their on-screen relationship, and her performance was great. I mean, that birthing scene, The special effects, makeup, and creature design are the best of the best. Practical effects will always win over CGI. Argue with the wall. We have arrived at 1987, and I have been so excited to talk about this one. The second vampire movie on this list, and my favorite vampire movie of all time, is The Lost Boys. Sleep all day, party all night, never grow old, never die. When a single mother and her 2 sons move to the sleepy seaside California town of Santa Clara, brothers Sam and Michael begin to realize that the local renegade band of bikers are more dead than alive. Director Joel Schumacher really said, I'm going to take all of the 80s pop culture I can and just slam it into this one movie about vampires. And he pulled it off. The whole vibe of this film is just immaculate. The storyline, the characters, Kiefer Sutherland as the vampire. A big critique of The Lost Boys is that they really chose style over substance, and while I can understand that reasoning, I've got to disagree. I do think it's an even split, 50-50, but even if that was the case, I really wouldn't love it any less. I think the dialogue is fantastic, and the comedic relief provided by Corey Feldman and Corey Haim, chef's kiss. The one-liners, this movie invented the one-liner.
Well, now let me put it this way. If all the corpses buried around here was to stand up all at once,
we'd have one hell of a population problem.
Even though it's a horror movie and it is scary at times, it doesn't take itself too seriously, and that's why I love it so much. And I will say that it has one of the best movie soundtracks of all time. I mean, Cry Little Sister, are you kidding me? 1988. I went back and forth in my head about this one a lot. It was again another scenario of, do I want them to think that I have the best movie taste of all time, which I admittedly I do not, or being honest. And honesty is always the best policy, am I right? So, for 1988, I gotta go with Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Directed by the Cheeto brothers, when a clan of evil extraterrestrials who all resemble clowns arrive on Earth, it's up to the townspeople armed with an ice cream truck to stop these aliens from destroying them all. I don't care if a movie is the worst thing ever put on screen. If it's full of creativity and imagination and there was some effort put in there, you're gonna have a level of my respect. And it just so happens that Killer Clowns has both of those things, and it's a great movie. We don't get movies like this anymore. Dumb, goofy, and dark just for the sake of being dumb, goofy, and dark. Clowns are a reoccurring thing in the horror genre, but Clownzilla? I will gladly sacrifice myself to him if I don't have to look at his creepy ass anymore. Alright, you guys, we have come to the end of the 80s, unfortunately, but I'm not gonna leave you with a bad movie. Oh no. I'm gonna leave you with a good movie. I'm talking about 1989's Pet Sematary. After tragedy strikes, a grieving father discovers an ancient burial ground behind his home with the power to raise the dead. Y'all, the grip that Stephen King had on the 80s. Of course, Pet Sematary is the film adaptation of Stephen King's book of the same name, which just so happens to be one of the most genuinely frightening books that I have ever read. And I've read a lot of scary shit. King himself says it's the only book he's ever written that's actually scared him. So, of course, the movie had big shoes to fill. Did it fill them? No. But did it give us a fun, loyal adaptation with some genuinely terrifying imagery? Oh yeah. The late Fred Gwynne as Judd Crandall is iconic, and Zelda? I slept with my lights on for weeks after watching this movie, and because of that, it gets my last pick for the 80s. There you have it, you guys. Those are my favorite horror movies for every year in the 80s. What'd you think? Did I miss a few? I know so many good ones came out in the 80s. I was honest in these rankings, and I am really proud of myself because I think I've got some bangers in here, some of my favorite movies of all time, a lot of Stephen King adaptations. What would you guys replace? What is your ranking? Tell me all about it. I'd love to hear it. And tell me which decade I should do next. 90s? 2010s? 70s? We got a while to go. We got a lot more to do. Thank you so much for your continued support. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up or subscribe. It would really make my day. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Stay creepy.